Can't you just feel it? The conflict is becoming apparent in our culture. It reminds me of those words of John Paul II. We're now living in the final confrontation between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between the church and the anti-church, between Christ and the antichrist. And if we don't choose to know God's word, to believe God's word, and follow God's word, we're going to be a sitting duck for all kinds of confusion, all kinds of disorder. Those are really important choices that people have to make.
And these choices are difficult. Who am I going to marry? What kind of life am I going to live? How am I going to raise my kids? What am I going to do with my time, my talent, and my treasure? And I have to make a choice today. Jesus says to each one of us, I came that you might have life and have it to the full. The question is, do we want it? Welcome, friends, to another week of The Choices We Face. It's my great delight today to introduce to you 16-year congressman in the U.S. Congress representing the 3rd District of Illinois, Congressman Dan Lipinski. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
Yes, and part of Dan's story we're going to get to is the kind of heroic way that he stood up for the pro-life cause while he was in Congress. But before we do that, Dan, just give us a little background. Kind of, you, as my friend Ralph Martin likes to say, you were born, then what? Yeah.
Well, born in Chicago, grew up in the southwest side of Chicago, very middle-class neighborhood. My mother was at home. My father worked for Chicago Park District. He eventually got involved in politics and was an alderman in Chicago City Council. Eventually, he ran for Congress and served for 22 years. I went to Catholic schools for 12 years in Chicago. Polish and Irish background, so was blessed with the ability to do well in school. Went to Northwestern and Stanford and was able to get 2 engineering degrees, earned 2 engineering degrees, went in, earned a PhD in political science then because I wanted to teach. And what I really love is government politics. So I went from the engineering over to political science so that I could teach college. But those are sort of the basics, but the Catholic schooling and growing up in Chicago, and like I say, with the Polish and Irish background, especially 3/4 Polish, 1/4 Irish, really learned the faith at home and in school and at church, and it made a big difference to me that give you a sense. So I'm 55 years old. I started high school in 1980. The papacy of John Paul II. In his visit to Chicago in 1979, I'm pretty sure it was, really had a huge impact on me and really helped to, build my faith.
Yeah. Weren't there close to 2 million people that gathered in Chicago when he was there, if I remember correctly? Just some massive number like that?
It was really incredible. They had mass at Grant Park in downtown Chicago, and I think you're right. I think there were about 2 million people who were there. I had the blessing to be able to attend a smaller mass at a Polish parish on the southwest side of Chicago, and so it was still an outdoor mass. It's still a big group. It wasn't 2 million, but unfortunately, I can't speak Polish.
Okay.
So I really wish I could. Not something I wanted to be able to do growing up, but I know about a dozen words right now. It's something I'd love to be able to do today.
So what role has St. John Paul II played in your own spiritual journey and your role as a leader?
Well, what he taught and how he and I always emphasize this to people, that he did not in any way water down the faith. He was very outspoken when he came to the evils of abortion, in communism, in other affronts to God. But he was also someone who understood we need to build, not just condemn. We need to build.
Yeah.
And he was able to draw people in, and he drew people in because of his personality and because he understood the need to build, draw people into the church, and people who are not in the church, to draw them into the teachings of the church. And I think that's especially important today when it's so tough, because we see these evils in the world. And you know, I think for all of us, certainly for me, the initial reaction is to just lash out at it. But it's so important that we need to speak the truth with love, because we can't just tear down.
Yeah.
We need to build up and to teach. And you don't do that just by lashing out.
And in your career as a politician, were there any particular writings that he had, Centesimus Annus, any documents that he wrote, things that he wrote that helped you in your vocation really as a politician?
Certainly, Centesimus Annus was critically important in his teachings there. I think it's really important, especially today, and as a Democrat, to look at Catholic social teaching, understand that Pope John Paul II, he knew, lived through the evils of communism, and embraced the the free market, but also understood that there have to be limits on
Yeah.
the free market. And it's not one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because today, on so many things, it's hard left or hard right. And there are things that we need to, and it's not giving anything up, but I think when it comes to economics, the free market is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And socialism, which is becoming more popular today, is a real threat. But we also have to understand, and I think as Catholics, we have to have a real conversation. What can the government do to help families, and especially help families with children? What does a living wage mean? What's the government's role in that? And I think John Paul II really contributed a lot to Catholic social teaching in his pontificate.
Yeah, he really did. Those are critical questions. Now, let's back up just a little bit in terms of when you made the pivot from engineer to politician, and what were those days like for you? What motivated you exactly, and what was your pathway all the way to Congress?
I got my bachelor's degree at Northwestern, then I went immediately to Stanford after that, a master's degree after spending 6 months working for Swiss Air in Switzerland, which is a tremendous experience. Came back home and I said, well, what do I feel God's calling me to do? And I really felt called to teach. And I thought, what do I really love? I love government politics, so I'm going to get a PhD in political science. I had thought when I was younger, when I went to college, when I started college, I thought I'm going to go to college, go to law school, go into politics. And somewhere through college, I thought, I don't know if I really want to go into politics, but I still really loved the vocation of, and I think it's critically important for especially Catholics to be involved in some way and not give up the public square.
Good point.
But I wanted, I felt like I was being called to teach. So after my PhD, worked in Washington, D.C. for 2 years, and worked at Notre Dame, taught at Notre Dame then for a year. Then I taught at the University of Tennessee for 3 years after that.
Political science,
Political
basically?
science,
Okay.
American government.
Okay.
And my father calls me and tells me he's retiring after serving 22 years in Congress. And he said, are you interested in coming back home and running? And I had not thought about this. I had gotten married 6 months before this, never talked to my wife about anything besides she thought she's marrying a college professor, so did I. But at that, I can't really explain it, but I prayed about it, talked to my wife, obviously, about it, and I thought, I think that I think I'm being called to serve in another way, and I'm going to do it because I know there are things that need to be done. I think public service is very important, and I have this opportunity to run. And my father paved the way for me
Yeah.
through his service.
And he knew how it all worked. He had a support system, name recognition, all the rest of
Yes,
that was very helpful in getting you launched.
yes,
Yeah.
because um, without him, I didn't have, you know, I probably would not have gone in as John Smith and run.
Yeah.
But I'm very thankful that I had that
Yeah.
opportunity.
So you had a set of things that were on your mind and heart about the difference you'd like to make in Congress. Like what were your priorities going to be? And I know just having read your story some that that's not the exact way that the Lord used you, but let's start there. Like what were the things that were burning in your heart and mind to say, I think I can have an impact in these areas which I think are critical for the country?
Well, I sort of looked at it this way. My first press conference I had, they asked me what my position was on abortion, and I said, I am pro-life. I will vote that way in Congress. Um, it's something very important to me, but it wasn't the reason I was running for Congress. I thought, well, I'm going to work to get on the transportation committee. I have a background, like I said, engineering background, political science background. I want to work in science and technology policy, and I thought that's what I'm going to do. Um, the other issues I'm going to stand strong on. Um, you know, life, family, but that's not going to be the centerpiece of what I do. Um,
Based on your training, your experience, your gifting, what you think you could really contribute to the whole thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I thought that's those
Yeah.
are areas I can really help
Yeah.
make good policy for our country and for my constituents. And so 2009, 2010, the Affordable Care Act came up, and the controversy over funding for abortion in the Affordable Care Act and taxpayer dollars being able to be used to purchase insurance to cover abortion. I was one of the pro-life Democrats who stood up and said, I'm not going to support that.
How many of you were there? 3 or 4, something like that, or?
Well, I won't go into the whole story. So I'll just say the bill went through the House. They did not want to there's a group of pro-life Democrats who said, we're not going to vote for it. Finally, they said, okay, we're going to have to give in to these pro-life Democrats, allow a vote on an amendment to say no funding for abortion. 64 Democrats voted for that. I mean, I think people find it hard to believe right now. 64 Democrats stood up and voted for that. That was a quarter of the Democrats in the House. Bill passes the House then with that prohibition in it. Senate goes and passes a different bill. Senator Ted Kennedy then died, taking away the 60th vote. So it was subject to a filibuster then in the Senate. So essentially, members of the House were told, well, you need to vote for the Senate bill, or else this isn't going to happen. And so the pressure was really on the pro-life Democrats then to say, okay, I'm going to vote for it, even though it doesn't have this prohibition on funding for abortion. And that's when things really got,
Hot.
yeah. I received calls from every Democratic leader, including President Obama. This is very important to President Obama, getting this bill passed. And I said, no, I am not going to vote for a bill that funds abortion. And I had a conversation with President Obama about what the bill actually said. I knew what the bill said. And so I'll just leave it at that. And it came down to it. They finally came forward. They need about 6 or 7 votes. There are about 12 pro-life Democrats left. and they offered this executive order saying no funding for abortion. The president will give this executive order. And I said, well, it doesn't, the law is what matters.
Yeah.
And so I will always remember that day where they brought the language in for this executive order. And like I said, there are about 10 or 12 of us, Democrats, and they asked each one of us, will you vote for the bill now? And I was the only one who said no.
Wow.
And at that point, then especially then after the 2010 election, a lot of pro-life Democrats lost. 2012 election, more pro-life Democrats lost. And we were down to 6 or 8 pro-life Democrats maybe left in the House. And at that point, I realized I need, especially after what happened with the Affordable Care Act, spotlight was on me at the time. I need to step forward and be a pro-life leader. It wasn't what I was planning, but I felt I had to do that.
Yeah.
And God was calling me to that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. So you really felt, you saw this fight that was going on and how serious it was. Somebody needed to step in from your party to take leadership in it. And then you became co-chair of the caucus, the pro-life
Yeah.
caucus, right?
Became co-chair of the pro-life caucus.
Yeah.
And so, I would speak at the March for Life in Washington. Since I was the only Democrat who would go up on stage, I got to speak all the time. It'd be me up there with about 35, 40 Republican members of Congress. But I thought it was really important for me, and it's important for the pro-life movement. I very strongly believe this. It cannot become a one-party issue. And about 25 to 30% of Democratic voters in the country say that they are pro-life, but they're not represented in the Congress with pro-life Democrats. So 2016 comes, President Trump is elected. 2017, it became very clear that the abortion lobby was going to target me in the next Democratic primary.
Mhm.
They poured in $3 million against me. They had a candidate to run against me who embraced every radical abortion position possible. And
Is that in part, Dan, the result of your own constituency changing? Like the demographic had shifted from the time your father was a congressman, your early years as a congressman, so the climate changed in your own district. Is that really what
to
happened?
some
or-
extent, the climate changed in the district.
Mhm.
Because when I was elected in 2004, there were a number of pro-life Democratic state representatives, state senators who were in my district. Every single one of them after they retired, they were replaced by a pro-choice Democrat.
Wow.
So things had changed. But more than what really added to that was the election of President Trump. That really, you remember the women's marches,
Right.
the women's marches that excluded pro-life women.
Yeah.
But there's a big change, especially in the suburbs. And that is what really helped to propel my opponent. And so 2018,
Yeah.
I narrowly won 51-49. They didn't ever stop coming after me, but I didn't back down. I mean, I kept being outspoken, in protecting the unborn. It was, I was then the Democratic leader on every piece of pro-life legislation in the House. So they came after me very hard again. I was outspent 2-1 in the 2020 Democratic primary. 5 Democratic presidential candidates endorsed my opponent. The only reason that happened is because they were showing their loyalty to the abortion lobby to say, well, we see this pro-life Democrat, and we're gonna show we're loyal. We're gonna show that we oppose him, and we want to get rid of him. It changed a lot. There's a real sense in the Democratic Party the party became more radical on the abortion issue. We saw Joe Biden change his position on the Hyde Amendment that prohibits taxpayer funding for abortion in the Medicaid program.
Yeah.
And so it really became, in the last few years, the Democratic Party, which was, when I started, I'd say that the party, many people in the party, grudgingly accepted people who were pro-life. And most pro-life Democrats are Catholic.
Yeah.
But it really got to a point in the last few years where it's unacceptable to be a pro-life elected official who's a Democrat.
So that leads me to ask you another question. It's amazing. It's a hard line that they seem to have drawn, and everybody's got to show their loyalty to that position in the party. And you had mentioned the need to not just become a one-party system, kind of the one party for that we need. It's important to be able to somehow get Democrats who support pro-life issues to get elected. And so I think a lot of people out there are trying to say, well, how can that even happen? Like, how are we going to do that exactly? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I work with Democrats for Life, and we are focused now, especially on states where there are a good number of pro-life Democrats who are still in elective office. They still exist. Illinois has changed drastically on that. Some states like Louisiana, West Virginia, and there are other states, Kentucky, I know some pro-life Democratic legislators. And to start building from, more on the local level, because it's so incredibly hard on the national level. But there are pro-life Democrats who I know who are running in primaries for Congress next year. And I think the only thing that I think it's going to have to be an electoral, a big electoral loss that finally convinces the Democratic Party maybe to accept pro-life Democrats again. That's the only thing really that I can see, just because the abortion lobby has so much power in the Democratic Party right now. So I know it's really hard. I mean, so many people told me they left the Democratic Party because of the life issue.
Sure.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
But I am,
Can I ask?
yeah.
Have they asked you the other question, like how can you stay in the Democratic Party? Because
Yes.
voices in the Catholic Church are saying, look, we're at the point now where some people are saying you can't even be Catholic and stay in the Democratic Party, because it's so radically moving in the wrong direction. How do you answer that?
Well, I say, first of all, let's go back to Mike McIntyre, who's a congressman from North Carolina, good pro-life Democrat. He lost, I think, in 2012. But we used to talk about this all the time. And I have people come up to me and say, well, if you're pro-life, you can't be a Democrat. And I'd talk to him about that. And he'd say, my answer to them is always, you got to go preach to those who need to hear it.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that it was important for the abortion lobby to get rid of me. I always said, I'm one vote out of 435 in the House. But it disturbed them so much that they spent more than $6 million to get rid of me, because they knew how important it was to try to extinguish all pro-life voices in the Democratic Party. So that's what I say. And I'm not going to be supporting, it didn't change my position. It's not going to change my position. And so that's my response to that.
Yeah, and if you run as a Democrat on a set of principles, you're going to be uncompromising on it. It's clear to you what they are. It's clear to your constituents, the people who are electing you. That's actually a pretty good place to be. To be able to be in the Democratic Party, to be able to stand for those principles that are consistent with your Catholic faith. You're not pushing your faith on anybody, but they're grounded in reason, and there's a reason that you're doing it, right? And so I think could be kind of a Trojan horse too, to help change the climate a little bit in the party. And so I can see your point of why it's not good to just have it all in one party. Especially, it's just going to create more momentum. And you could see when you were running at that time when President Trump was elected, they could probably, Narel and others could probably just smell you were vulnerable at that time.
Because it was so easy then
Yeah.
to say, well, he's like Trump.
Yeah,
He's pro-life just like Trump.
yeah,
And I think that really hurt.
yeah, yeah. It's really amazing. So I just want to say before we wrap up, we just have a minute or so, just to thank you so much for your consistent, strong stand and using the talents and the grace and the moment that the Lord gave you to stand and to fight for the unborn. I know it took a great deal of courage. You're certainly, as we were talking before the program, I know a lot of Polish people from working in Poland. They're just strong and stubborn, and that's a virtue in this case. And I know you took a lot of hits, and I know the Lord is grateful for it as well. So thank you for being with
Thank you.
us. And real quickly, what do you see yourself doing in the next few years? You're going to stay in politics in some way, or are you going to?
Well, people ask me, I say I'm not planning on running for office again, but I never say never. But what I really want to do is use the opportunity and to evangelize, especially young Catholics. I'd love to get back to university and do it there, but I'm writing and I'm speaking about things that are very important to me, especially the Catholic faith.
Fantastic. Thank you for being with us. And friends, I'd like to offer you this free booklet, Join the Resistance, that Ralph Martin has written. You can see the 800 number, call the 800 number. You could also download our Renewal Ministries app to touch everything that we're doing, the videos and the rest. And also you can find more about Dr. Lipinski probably on Google, what he's doing and how you can get him as a speaker in your area. God bless you. Hope to see you again next week.
Join the resistance. I'm only talking about resisting one thing: the lies of the devil working through our corrupt culture that are intended to drag us and the whole human race to ruin. There's no way of explaining the radical changes in our culture and even in our church without recognizing the work of the evil one. This booklet identifies some of the main lies we encounter and gives us tools to recognize and resist them. As Scripture says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. So ground yourself ever more deeply in the personal love of Jesus and the absolute truth of his teaching. Ask him for the courage and wisdom needed. And from that place of trust and confidence, join the resistance.